So good afternoon and welcome everybody to our high-level policy webinar. We have been we developed in the recent months to accompany our workshop that we have been just working on for the last 2 days in the beautiful SMK National Gallery of Denmark. And we would like, first of all, thank our hosts to welcoming us in such a beautiful environment with such a positive spirit and working possibilities and also inspiring solutions that we could reach. I have to say that the workshop and the webinar are the consequence of an initiative that came out of the European Network Association communities already last year in December, where we discussed all different ways of how artificial intelligence can influence our work and our workflows in the cultural heritage institutions, but also in the sector as such. My name is Ines Vodopivec, and I'm a Secretary General of Artificial Intelligence for Libraries, Archives, and Museums, and I'll be your host for today, for today's webinar. And going from the workshop that we have been really intensively, we have been developing and discussing what are our opportunities, our issues, what are our possibilities to develop with the AI tools and systems in the, I will say, fantastic future that is coming for us. We are now at this moment transitioning to the policy alignments, and with alignment assembly that was issued this year in spring. We are trying to focus all our efforts also to the strategical positioning of using and making our lives better with artificial intelligence. Not to be too long, I would like now to invite our first speaker, our host, Camilla Jalvin, Head of Collections and Research at the SMK. Please.
Thank you, and good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of the museum and all our organizers, co-organizers, I'm very pleased to welcome both those of you here in the room and those joining us online to this webinar on culture and AI held during the Danish EU presidency. A special thanks to our partners, the Europeana Foundation, the Europeana Network Association, the Netherlands Institute for Sound and Vision, and AI for LAM for making this event possible. So, since we are gathered here at SMK, I'd like to take a few moments to place the question of AI in this particular setting, our museum, the National Gallery of Denmark. SMK houses a collection of around 200,000 works of art, spanning more than 700 years of history. As a proud heritage institution, we are quite literally surrounded by the past. And yet, in our research, in our exhibitions, and in the questions we ask, we constantly strive to connect with the present. One tool in this effort is, of course, artificial intelligence. AI shapes the time we live in, and we see great potential in using it to open new ways of encountering the past in the present. Borrowing a term from Hegel, the French philosopher Catherine Malabou has described artificial intelligence as the world spirit speaking to itself. As she puts it recently in a Danish paper, in an interview, and I'm quoting, "Most of humanity's spirit is now accessible in this data, which is now entering into dialogue with itself. It's both terrifying and fascinating at the same time." At SMK, we have already entered into this kind of dialogue with this world spirit in quite a few ways, actually. First of all, we contribute validated data to our collective digital consciousness through SMK Open, our freely accessible online collection. And as an extension of this work, we recently joined as a partner in Lex, the first attempt to create a Danish chatbot built entirely on validated data from research institutions and archives. If you visit SMK Open, our online collection, you can of course search for artists and artworks. But you can also search through AI-driven connections by color, by motive, or by any kind of visual or associative relation the system detects. AI also helps us detect locations, creating what we call the art map of Denmark, allowing users to find artworks made right around the corner from where they live. We've also run a number of experiments. For instance, we made the Korean artist Tae Young speak Danish. We've tested AI-based recognition tools during our SMK Fridays, inviting visitors to interact with the collection in new, embodied ways. And most recently, we created a chatbot through which visitors could ask questions to the 19th century sculptor Anne-Marie Carl Nielsen based on her letters, diaries, and writings. Our aim in this case wasn't to resurrect her, but to explore what it means to encounter an archive through dialogue. So why do we do all this? Why do we, as a museum, engage with AI? We do it, like many others, to work smarter and more efficiently. We do it to open new ways of engaging with history. But above all, we do it to use the museum as a space where we can learn and evolve alongside technology. A space where curiosity and critical reflection can coexist. It's often said that a museum should be a safe space for unsafe ideas. That applies to AI as well. We need testing grounds. We need room and time to experiment. The museum is, among other things, one such ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Camilla Jarving, for that warm and inspiring motivational speech that we had now. Providing some background and some insights that we have been developing the last 2 days, I would like to welcome Harry Varayan, the General Director of Europeana Foundation, to give us some insights on how the data space will thrive with AI and how we will be able to develop a new future. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Ines. And hello, everyone. Let me see if I can make this technology work. Yes. So indeed, I'll try to update you on some of the developments we've been researching over the past months, I would say, and culminating in the last couple of days here at the fantastic SMK, which we're graciously hosted. Thank you so much. Let me just tell you a little bit about the starting points. Europeana is a collective endeavor. We are both an organization hosted in the Royal Library in The Hague. We're also a networked association of close to 6,000 members. We are connected to museum libraries and an archival community through a network, a pan-European network of aggregators. And collectively, we try to join up towards a shared goal that is supported by the European Union and our partnerships. And that goal, I could best summarize as this. We hope that our work, our collective work, helps to develop an open, knowledgeable, and creative society That's the aim. And the primary job we feel we have is to democratize access to cultural heritage data. Now, in the word democratize, of course, lies a lot of value. There's a lot of conceptual things to unpack if we look at this. And I think one of the things we care most about, and when we start talking about AI, is how that influences, both positively or perhaps negatively, that word democratization. So that's what we'll explore in the coming in the coming slides. Just to give you an idea of numbers, we have collectively brought together over 60 million paintings, newspapers, magazines, letters, postcards, and so forth from all across Europe, from the whole period of written and worked out history. We've put a lot of attention on the word reusable over the past 15 years. We wanted to make sure that that material is not only viewable, but people can also do something with it, be it a creative, be it a teacher, be it a researcher, and so forth. And again, this is something that we need to critically investigate when we talk about the role of AI in that democratization process. So, I think, as Camilla already said, we feel both positively inclined towards the possibilities of AI, and at the same time we feel a little unsure. I think that's the best summary I think we can give about where we feel we are with AI, which is why we started what we call an alignment assembly, tapping into the collective knowledge of our networks, and not only the knowledge but also the feelings about things. How emotionally attached are we to AI, and what are our conditions? That started with a survey, essentially, where we put forward initially 20 statements, ranging, for example, from we should advocate against accelerated use of AI in the cultural sector, which you see on the bottom of this slide. And you can see that you have a range of opinions about this statement. Some people would be a little bit more cautious about this, while others would be already quite positively inclined. So we then invited people to also submit their own statements, because dialogue that Camilla already mentioned, I think is a critical part of this survey. It's not just us throwing questions out. All in all, we had a dialogue, if you want, with about close to 400 people in our network, and we had 10,000 votes. And we feel that with that, we have at least a good temperature of the water of what the people in our community feel about AI. I invite you to read the document. There's a report out on Europeana Pro where you can see all of the details, and I think it's really worth reviewing that. What I'm going to do now is tell you how we've worked with a group of about 40 people we invited to come over here in Copenhagen to investigate the results of that report. We focused on 4 things in particular. There were 3 key dilemmas that were bubbling up from the alignment assembly, and I'll go deeper into it in a minute, but they are the tension field we feel between openness, which is something that our sector has fought hard for over the past 15 years. We believe culture belongs to everyone, therefore openness, versus the extraction that we also feel is happening with AI at the moment, with the big parties you see there on the left-hand side of your screen. So that was dilemma number 1. The second one is about bias. We know that our historical material contains a lot of bias. How does that promulgate when we use AI or work with AI to make that data available? And the third one is the climate implications. We know that AI is, even more so than other technological tools, very energy demanding and also water demanding. So those are the 3 dilemmas, and overall, on top of that, the main thing that came out of the report is that our sector, or the people in our sector, I should say, are really in need of our own narrative around the work of AI. We do feel there's a lot of consensus that we should not just succumb ourselves to the narratives that are being imposed upon us by a couple of large entities. The question, of course, is what is that narrative and what can we do with it? So in the following slides, I'll give you a summary of what we've picked up over the past 2 days in a very intensive workshop. The first thing is that while the respondents of the Alignment Assembly qualify themselves, or we qualified them, I would say rather, as either opportunity seekers, people who are mostly positively inclined towards the use of AI, while there was also a section, about a third of them, which qualified more as boundary setters. We're interested in AI, but we first want to fence that off properly before we engage ourselves properly into this thing. And I think one of the key things that came out of today and yesterday is that the boundary setters and opportunity seekers are two converging, sometimes conflicting components of each of us. None of us are naive enough to just think we can just step blindly into this world, while none of us either are so so critical that we say, well, let's wait until the world is in a better place before we engage with AI. Strong consensus is that we as a sector, as safekeepers of knowledge, as stewards of data, of historical data, should play a much more active role than we've played in the past. So the question is how to move that forward. First observation that came out is that there's a distinction to be made between the role heritage can play for AI. We have data that is relevant for the development of AI in large, and at the same time we can use AI also to advance the digital transformation of our sector. Right in the middle there are 3 key values that we've been working on in the Europeana network since the start of the existence of Europeana. We believe that when we engage ourselves with AI, it should be as usable as possible. The FAIR principles really apply here. But it should also be for mutual benefit. It cannot be that one government or one institution decides on behalf of others, what kind of data should be made available. There should be reciprocity into the system. And the final bit, and I think to me personally that was the biggest takeaway from everything, our unique selling point, if you want, the thing that we're really good at as a sector, better than most organizations who deal with data, is that we are stewards of reliable data. We've been stewarding and safeguarding that data for as ever we've been mandated with this important task. So how can we make these things work, usable, mutual, and reliable, when we work with AI, either as a supplier or as a taker? Mindfulness down there at the bottom means that we feel there is agency here in the decision making. We do not have to succumb ourselves. We can say no to certain things if we want to. We can also say yes, but determine the conditions. So to come back to the 3 dilemmas, the first one is an observation that heritage is indeed really relevant for AI. Many people I talk to seem to think, who's interested in old books from the 19th century? I don't know if you have ever experienced that. I think it's worthwhile recognizing that, on the one hand, a lot of data has been scraped from the web, but certainly not everything. And there's a real recognition also from big organizations like Google, like OpenAI, who are actively digitizing material and investing money into that structured long text, for example, and trustworthy data, deep knowledge really comes from the kind of material that we have on offer. So AI should not be seen as a purely technological experiment. It's not only about development and code. It's fundamentally a cultural practice if we think about intelligence in the way that we've used to think about intelligence in the past. And it will make a lot of things possible, including open science, if we do this properly. So if we think of heritage as training data, we feel active stewardship is needed. It means that we do not just wait until someone comes and knock on our door to see what kind of data we're willing to make available. We should employ people. We should employ people to make the data available properly, in bulk, under provenance restrictions, under restrictions of representation, and also reciprocity. So the active part of this is a really important takeaway, and we should feel free to say no when we have reason to believe that's the case. And on the other side of this, reliability is key. There are many technical ways post-training data that we can also employ ourselves in. This could create a little opening. So instead of thinking we need to develop the next large language model, we should think of this more broadly. AI is much more than large language models or even machine learning for starters. And there's lots of ways post-training of the foundational models that we can influence on how the data is being represented. This is where retrieval augmented generation might play a role. The second thing was about bias, and here the assertion we're taking is that on the one hand, for example, all data has bias. Let's not think that we are in the business of erasing bias out of historical data. The important thing is that we are able to contextualize the bias so that it's more understandable for other machines or humans when that bias is popping up. And this is something that we have a lot of expertise and knowledge in, and we can, again, on a more proactive way, support large language models and other AI developments to recognize data more properly in data and also help them to learn from it. So from a reactive stance, we feel that there is an opportunity here also because we feel there's an increased demand for more ethical AI models than are currently on the market. And the final dilemma we've grappled with is climate, a very complex and very urgent problem, as we know. There's no lack of awareness in our sector about this. I think everyone knows the implications of using energy in intelligence and information transformation. The problem is in the solution area. And there are three avenues that we're considering at the moment. One is perhaps to work together on a green charter, which would have an advocacy role. Guidelines for the sector on how to deploy and use AI in a more climate-friendly way, being more energy efficient, and leading by example. And here we have a couple of examples of organizations that do that really well. The National Library of Norway, for example, popped up as one of those examples. So to conclude, there are three dilemmas that we need to unpack more with the network. We'll set up some task forces and working groups to help us advance these things. But I'd like to end this with a couple of takeaways on how we could do this better. So the first one is that we need to step out of the narrative that there is one world spirit to dialogue with, perhaps one organization or a monopoly of organizations to interface with. But maybe we should think of AI more as an ecosystem of actors who have data, computing power, communities, developers, and so forth, who can work together to build the best possible output based on that data. It's not just about large language models that keeps coming up. That is something that is very prevailing in our discussions, but it's much more than that. And building those ecosystems will allow us to think about reciprocity and collaboration in a different way. Two really big needs. One is computing infrastructure, technical infrastructure that our sector is lacking compared to other sectors. And a very important thing is to build AI confidence. Which is more than just the competence to deal with AI, but the confidence to deploy that wisely and in a good way. We think that we should not underestimate that we have, while limited, but we have real agency here. We have a tendency to think, the psychology maybe of our sector is that we feel we're a small library or a small museum or archive, and that those big technology players are really in the lead here. But through collaboration, as we've seen in the Europeana network, we have real agency. We have something to say. Trust is at the core of it, reliability, and that's something we need to keep investing in. We also see humans playing a critical part. It's not just about data, it's about the professionals who can help make that data available in the right way. And finally, we feel very strongly, as I started out with, that there is an opportunity here to give a new and positive signal. We should not let ourselves be dragged into negativity. I think we're all prone to this. We all read the news. But there's something that we can do here. And an important side note to this is we need to acknowledge and address the human fears that are very real and true, without losing the sight that we have a role to play in building a new positive signal. And we can make use of the creative vibe that we have together as cultural institutions, related to the creative institutions that we work with. So, we think positively as boundary setters, as well as in advancing the sector, that we can actively experiment and also think and create a better and more positive way of interacting with AI. So I'd like to leave it at this, Ines, and give you the floor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Harry, for this positive attitude. And I think that in collaboration, we can reach actually to all the communities of our European Network Association, as well as the communities of AI for LAM and other communities that are active in the cultural heritage sector. And I think as positive ambassadors of digital transformation, of digital change, of shift, of how we process, how we deal with our workflows, and how we deal with data in our everyday environments is something that can bring us very well and good results. And of course, dealing with the data, we also heard about the openness of data. I would like now to invite Paul Keller, Director of Policy at European Open Future, to speak about openness. Please.
Thank you. Okay. Well, thank you. Thanks to our hosts here at SMK. I've also been at the workshop that Harry mentioned, and you will see that a little bit in the presentation. I will start with a more general talk that's largely based on a paper that we published at the beginning of the summer, which is called Beyond AI and Copyright. So that's part one of the presentation. And then part two of the presentation comes back to some of the issues that Harry addressed in this presentation and that we have worked on collectively with many people here in the room today. And sort of like I'll give it my own sort of like forward-looking sort of ideas about that. But first, let's go back to this Beyond AI and Copyright presentation. I think it starts at a very similar space, what has been alluded to by many of the previous speakers, that sort of AI poses us with very fundamental questions about our institutions, about how we run society, about how we access and work with information. And for me, that started with a LinkedIn post by Jan LeCun, who is Meta's AI chief scientist, or chief AI scientist at Meta, who posted this in, this is an old screenshot, it was posted in January, I think, and in which that post drew a lot of consternation also from library sectors, because here is Meta, one of the most powerful companies, most richest companies in the world, and basically says like, all you cultural heritage institutions, you need to give us all our data because we're building this great thing. But and they make a bit of a play around sort of open source AI here, which many people in the community question that what Meta is actually doing or was doing at that stage was real open source AI. But why I found this interesting is sort of like this notion, this idea that's in there that says where AI systems will constitute the repository of all human knowledge and culture. And for someone like me who's worked with organizations who've sort of like consider themselves the repositories of all human knowledge and culture, this sector that we're all talking about, this triggered some thoughts, right? Like this is essentially a threat to us, if you will. This guy is saying like, we will replace you. We can do the things that previously you did. And so what does that mean? And sort of let me unpack that a little bit in 9 points. So first of all, I think what he points to is a very important realization that AI is a new socio-cultural technology. AI is not some kind of like additional development in sort of internet, digital things, but it's fundamentally something different. It's fundamentally a new type of technology that mediates between human beings and information. And in that sense, it's probably more comparable to things like the invention of the printing press, the invention of broadcasting, the invention of the internet. And it is a new step change in this thing, right? Like it is a new mechanism that sits between us and information, and that allows us to understand information, that allows us to access information. It, to some degree, allows us to access enormous amounts, filter these enormous amounts of information that we've collected online. And secondly, and to this that we've collected online, is AI is built on all of the knowledge that is out there, right? Like these AI systems, these large language models which dominate the discourse about AI at the moment, there's other forms of AI, but they are fundamentally possible because they have access to all the knowledge in digital form that we've shoved on the internet in the past things. We as a sector have done this, but like countless individuals in fora and whatnot have done this. Obviously, the creative industries, the news publishers who put newspapers on the internet, everybody who contributes to this digitally available knowledge has actually fed these models. So in this sense, you could argue that all AI as we currently do this is public AI. Not necessarily public AI and publicly owned, publicly controlled, governed by public values, but at least built on public knowledge, right? Like this is the collective public knowledge of humanity is currently fed into these systems and is sort of commodified in them and is presented to us back as AI. So what does that mean us? What does that leave us with, this realization that sort of like maybe unwillingly, maybe sort of like willingly, we've all contributed to making this possible, right? That leaves us with two risks from my perspective. And there's a first risk, which is more of an economic risk, if you will. That is the risk of enclosure and commodification of these commons. And I pointed to that before. Like all this digital commons, this thing that we made publicly available is currently predominantly fed into the systems that are maintained by giant commercial entities with the aim of selling this back to us, commodifying these things, enclosing the commons, the information commons, right? That is one thing, and that poses questions around the sustainability of information production if they suck up everything like in the graphic that Harry had shown and then try to sell it back to us. What's the motivation for us to do the stewardship? What's the motivation for the news publishers to continue publishing journalism? What's the motivation for others to create? And the second risk is one that is more of a democratic risk, if you will, right? Like if these are mainly a very few, very large organizations that control this mediation layer between humans and information, we are going into a world where access to information is even more centrally controlled than it is right now, right? Like imagine a world where the 5 or what buildings that Harry had on that slide, like they control our access to information. And these are largely black boxes that are presented to us. So like this is a very, very real thing that sort of like their motivations, their biases, but also maybe their sort of like instructions from their governments are built in there in order to sort of modify the information that we're consuming through these systems. So these two risks need to be addressed. And the answer to that is simple or difficult. It's probably simple to imagine and difficult to build, right? Is that we need a public AI infrastructure. Right? Like we need to build something that can exist alongside these things. We need to challenge this logic that access to information is only a commercial opportunity. This is a societal necessity that we control this. And we've done this before, right? Like let me talk about, like I mentioned these previous things, the previous sort of socio-technological innovations, broadcasting and the internet. Broadcasting, when that came along, most societies, certainly in Europe, have all come to the conclusion this is a very powerful technology. Like our leaders can talk to like the entire population at once. We can reach everybody in every corner of the country. And they thought like maybe that's a bit dangerous to democracy, or even in some cases like around that time we weren't all Democrats, but like this is a challenge to the power of societies to organize themselves. Right? And therefore, we cannot leave this to the market. Therefore, we need to organize public service media systems, public broadcasters, right? And that is something that existed alongside sort of commercial information distribution at that time. There was, in most cases, a clear sort of dualist vision along these things where we said we need this from a public logic and we can also have this from a commercial logic. And then a couple of decades, maybe 100 years later, The next technology comes along, the internet in the 1990s, like the prevailing thought, like the prevailing economic climate is completely different. And there's a very conscious decision at that time to say like, this is something that we leave to the market, right? Like in many European countries, like there were active discussions about like shutting public broadcasters, shutting publicly funded institutions out from participating in this, because that was seen as sort of that was presented as a competition issue. They had an advantage because they were publicly funded. They would minimize the opportunities for the market to generate wealth in this. And sort of like, I think we all know what happened as a result of that. Like the fact that we are confronted with social media platforms that dominate much of the public discourse, that are run by people who care about the revenue that generates and like translate that into algorithms which feed this content and things like that, is like a direct consequence of us saying like, no, we don't see a role for sort of public interest actors in that environment. We don't want something like broadcasting media. And so when we say we want a public AI system, we imagine something like public broadcasting, right? Like this is not just public organizations or public content. Public broadcasting in its heydays was also like the center of many technological innovations, of many organizational innovations, of lots of cultural life. Like people who created art, created documentaries were drawn to these things. That is faded away a little bit, but like we can combine technology, infrastructure, and sort of creative expression and information production and democracy in one place. Like we need to imagine institutions when we imagine something like public AI. So that's the thing that we need alongside of the commercial actors that currently dominate this field if we want to ward off this threat of this threat of centralization. Like people need to be able to have an alternative how they access their information. And people, like, let's make that more abstract. Like, if this technology, and I think that's pretty certain, is something that will find its way into our education systems, in our health systems, like, then we want that technology to be governed by public values. We do not want to introduce commercial products into like our education systems. We want to have something that's transparent, that's governed by public values, etc. We want public AI, we need public AI. The second thing is the information ecosystem, like the sustainability of the information ecosystem. A lot of the discussion that AI causes is often sort of shrouded in discussions about copyright. Like this is rights holders versus tech companies. Like the ones get their stuff taken away by the others, and they cry, this is unfair, and it is unfair, I would argue. But they are not the only information producers. Like if we care about an information ecosystem, and people in this room, and probably people listening to this will know this, the information ecosystem is much larger than just rights holders, less people who are motivated to create because that is their profession, or that this is they try to make that their profession. The information ecosystem are information stewards, like cultural heritage organizations, who care for the information, who digitize that, who preserve that, who maintain that, who make it available, who like put that into context. But it's also projects, digital commons projects like Wikipedia, right? Like which struggles with many of the same questions that we've been discussing in this workshop over the past 2 days as well. They are also challenged by the emergence of this massive extraction that doesn't seem to give something back at the moment. So we need to think this broader than just a narrow class of organized rights holders, which means that copyright will not fix this. Copyright alone is probably like just too small, too outdated, was invented in reaction to other challenges to really fix this thing, right? Like, and we need to think bigger than copyright, right? Like this doesn't mean abandoning rights holders, this doesn't mean abandoning creators, but that needs to think about them as part of something bigger, of this information ecosystem. And that means we need to think about mechanisms of redistribution that go beyond the limits of copyright. At the moment, sort of most people in the creative industries somehow imagine redistribution in relationship to this AI revolution as something we can license training data. Or if somebody comes to our website with a chatbot, like they pay a little bit. Like so companies currently trying to turn that into a business model. Right, but like that is sort of like this quid pro quo of I give access in a world where everything has been taken, right? Like regardless if it was owned by Elsevier or if it was published by Europeana under an open license, like which are two completely different ends of the spectrum with regards to how people think about copyright probably, All of that has fed in there. And so we need to think maybe it is not about the taking, but it is about where the value is created. And if we want to go towards a sustainable AI information ecosystem, we maybe need to think the value is created when commercial systems are put to the market, right? Like there's value added to this. Like the companies see this as the point where they will eventually like get return on their investment. And so why don't we think about a levy or a tax that comes in whenever someone puts a commercial AI system on the market, a certain percentage or a fixed fee in the levy case gets collected, and that gets turned back to funding the public AI information ecosystem, funding rights holders, but also funding other types of information producers like Wikipedia or like cultural heritage institutions, for example, to digitize more, right? Like we need to look forward. It is pretty clear that this is a vast technological change that we need to deal with, and we cannot afford making the same mistake that we made with the internet, that we completely leave this to the market. And we can also not afford to just look at the tools that we currently know them, like copyright law, to address this. We need to think bigger here. So this is first part of the talk. It's a bit of a jarring shift. There's the second part. I found a nice graphic that now goes back to the role of cultural heritage data in this. Or like, what does this tell us about making cultural heritage data available? What's inherent in this thing, the assumption is that as a sector, we want to contribute to building a public AI information ecosystem because it is necessary, right? Like without public AI, we are lost. And I think we've heard, and that also came out of this workshop, we want to have an active role in this sector. And I think, though it wasn't particularly mentioned, that is an active role in the public side of this. We don't want to be some little wheel on the side of providing better data for OpenAI or Google or whoever. We will do that as well, but like we will only do that if that, or we only want to do that if that also contributes to this public alternative that gives us control, that allows us to embed our values into this, right? Like that's the assumption. People may not, and I think you pointed to this, like with the alignment assembly, that not everybody is on the same page. We see largely two groups. This is maybe more the opportunity seekers perspective than the boundary setters at the moment. The boundary setters probably tend towards more like, let's keep the data to ourselves and see like how this develops and maybe we'll find some way. I think this is more a sort of argument for continuing to contribute to the public information production, but trying to do this under our own terms. And there's two realizations, and this a little bit mirrors what Harry already said. Like on the one hand side, we need to recognize that all the public data has already been taken, right? Like let's stop complaining about that. Like that has happened. That is something that was in the end maybe a technological inevitability, but we have much more and much higher quality data. Like we have data that sort of like AI companies want, that AI companies need, that crucially also researchers in Europe who build this, not as companies, but there's a number of open source projects that are funded by the Commission who say like, we want to build a different type of AI. They need access to this data. That's high quality data. That's sometimes data that we already have in digital form. That's not publicly available, hidden behind logins or sort of like only available for specific types of users, but that is obviously also a lot of data which doesn't exist in digital form at this moment, which is data which exists sort of like books that haven't been digitized yet, sort of paintings, photos that haven't been digitized yet, right? Like there is a lot that isn't available in a form that it can easily be fed into these systems. And important, if you go back to my initial point, like this is not only about training and building these models, this is also making sure that our data, the carefully curated data, the data with historical context, the data with sort of like that's placed in its context is available when accessed via AI, right? Like this means people will use AI as a technology in order to access information. I don't know who of you has ever tried to read one of those 16th century books that get digitized in the libraries. That's a bit hard. Try to put that into an AI model and ask it some questions, how that relates to your particular interests or something. That's quite fascinating what you get back. Like I have worked with libraries to digitize books for 15 years. I've never really looked into these PDFs because honestly, they are a bit intimidating to me. You can talk to them. People will do this, right? Like people will ask AI to find something for them, and for that, it needs to be findable. That means like we need to have our collections open. Closing our collections just takes this away from the people who are interested in this information. And now something went wrong with my slides. Apparently, like the last update from Google didn't go through. I still have 5 minutes and I still have 5 slides, but they are not here. So let me try to do this. We talked a lot in this thing about these 3 principles that guide Europeana's works: usability, mutuality, and reliability. And I think we've come, and I'm talking for the conversations that I was involved in, but like also like some of the group conclusions that were presented, we've come to the conclusion that these still stand, right? Like these are still important principles that guide our work, but we need to figure out how to relate them to the work that Europeana can do, that cultural heritage institutions can do in the AI context. Like how can we translate these principles, or how can we embed these principles in our work under the conditions of AI? Because with these principles, they have been sort of like the scaffolding that allowed us to sort of justify the open approach of saying like, we want to make this information open. And we think this is still important. We need to produce this information. We need to make this information available. And sort of if you translate these 3 terms into some of the more sort of like specific considerations in the AI context, openness, the usability, is still very much the commitment to open access, like the commitment to ensuring that people have access to information that helps with research and innovation, that justifies our sort of role in society. That's for many governments, that's maybe something, no. Sorry, like I'll stop it. So that helps us justify, like that's foundational to like the work that we do. The second part, reliability, trust, authenticity, authority, are extremely important, are more important than ever in an environment where information can be made up by machines, right? Like we sort of like own collections of things where we know that they existed before they became data, like, right? Like a library can point to this. This is not only like digital text, there is a book actually, and that book was here before computers were even invented. Same with many paintings in this house or many art objects. Like we can guarantee that something is authentic. We have authority. We provide anchors in this environment. So this is even more important. And then the third principle, and I think that's the one that we talked about most in the in some of the discussions, is mutual, like reciprocity to some degree. Like how can we ensure that something is to a shared societal benefit? And that is where a lot of the questions around AI are arising. Like Harry started with this slide, or one of the first slides were the one about extraction. Extraction is fundamentally something that's not mutual, right? Like that's not reciprocal. Extraction, something is extractive if sort of like one entity gets all the value and the other one gets nothing. So how can we turn that into, like how can we come back to something that's mutual? And I think many in the sector have the feeling that this requires some stepping back from principles from unconditional openness, right? Like where openness in any scenario for any use of the data is maybe something we can't afford anymore, and that we need to think that while having a commitment to openness when it comes to individual access by individual researchers, by individual patrons of our organization, for people who come to our websites or like access our collections through AI system, that this is something that has to be guaranteed. But if entities come who want to use the data, like I said, give us the data in bulk, let us train on that, let us integrate that into our models, we might say like, hey, there needs to be a bit of a quid pro quo. Maybe this is something where in order for preferential access to this, you give us back some of the, or reimburse us some of the costs for creating this data, or you enable us to digitize more of the data so we can continue feeding data into the systems. And so we're thinking about some qualifications, some people call this conditional access. And we need to find a way how we can sort of reconcile sort of potentially structuring different levels of access in relationship to, according to to sort of like these three principles, that all of them are maintained. And that is something that I think some of the follow-up work from this workshop, some of our follow-up work will go towards. This is something that is shared much wider than us. Like the past 2 weeks have seen a number of events from the Wikimedia community, and Wikimedia is struggling with exactly the same. Wikimedia, the source of all human knowledge on the internet, is something that is increasingly disintermediated by this new socio-cultural technology because people don't reach Wikipedia anymore. They are happy with the chatbot answers. Wikimedia, that's not so much like a funding problem at this moment, that's something that's a visibility problem that may turn into a funding problem. And Wikipedia has been experimenting with these ideas of total commitment to openness, saying like, yes, everybody can take this at every time, while at the same time, the service is called Wikimedia Enterprise, also saying, but if you are a big user of our data, if you have benefits from like an actually super fast API, if you want to have this in bulk, always in real time, there's another way for you to get us, but then you have to contribute back to our costs of running this system. And so that is something I think this sector needs to explore, because it is pretty clear at the moment that when this idea of this core principle of how we've structured our work is increasingly challenged by something that isn't perceived to be mutual anymore. Like this entire scaffolding that underpins the idea, our commitment to open access to cultural data, starts becoming wobbly and is in danger of collapsing. And I think this workshop has shown that we want to avoid that. So thank you very much. Sorry for the muck-up with the slides, and yeah.
Thank you very much, Paul Keller, for this inspiring talk. I have to say that I really admire your mention at the beginning. You mentioned Gutenberg. It's interesting, and maybe, okay, we are all historians probably, or at least some of us. We know that the access of data, which happened in the Renaissance, actually completely transformed the society. It completely transformed the way how people also, for example, work in science. The citations, and also copyright is emerged from that period. And maybe we are facing now again a transition that will advance us in some other period or in some other time, in some other way of how we process and we deal with information. But this is an excellent start, and I think it's still, I'll say, in a positive mood to what we want to achieve and where we want to go with our progress. And it's also a nice introduction in our panel. And for this part, I would like to again invite our host, Camilla Jalving, Head of Collections at SMK, to join us on stage. Then I would ask Ole Kag Molgaard, did I say correctly? Head of Secretariat of the National Encyclopedia Lex Denmark, and Brigitte Vezina, Director of Policy and Open Culture at Creative Commons. We will try to address a few aspects of that are also important in the scope of the Danish presidency, and one of that is of course the societal role of cultural heritage institutions, but also data, as we already heard, in this new role, in this new environment that we have. We have a few minutes for each speaker, so I would invite each speaker to say a few words on the subject, and I would start with Camilla first. You already introduced us with some use cases in your institution, this institution where we are today, so from the museum perspective. And I would like to ask you also, what is the institutional, the museum's task in demonstrating, interrogating, and developing our common understanding of AI? Please.
Thank you, Ines, and thank you for posing that question. Obviously, I've been thinking a lot about what to actually address on this day. Being an art historian by training, I have no further insight into AI other than I use ChatGPT with big pleasure. But what I've been thinking about is that AI really poses a question to the museum in a quite fundamental way. Because in the time we live in, museums no longer hold the monopoly on cultural narratives. History, if it ever was, but history is now written, history is now written, circulated and distorted through algorithmic systems. And these systems do not merely reflect what we know, they shape what can be remembered. So working within an institution that is very much about memory, about producing what will be remembered, it just turns out that digital presence is extremely vital. And also, as Paul said, that we have much more data, but we need to get it out there. So valid data is vital. We know about fake news, we know about fake data, but fakeness is also systemic. And this is one of the important points, that it's not just about bringing the data out there, it's also about looking into the systems that organize data. It's a question about biases, it's a question about hierarchies of knowledge. So if we look into art history, there is a very reasonable assumption that it is the same patriarchal logic that once structured art history that now structures data. The same absences migrate, so to speak, from the archive to the data set. And if we do nothing, the erasures repeat themselves at scale. So I guess my proposition is that AI is a memory apparatus, one that must be claimed, shaped, and interrogated in order not to reproduce the exclusion of the past. And last night I just did the test. Not really a well-founded empirical exercise, I know, but nonetheless I did this test. I asked ChatGPT, name 10 artists from the Nordic countries from the 19th century. And it came up, it's very willing, as you know. It just takes like a split second to do what I would, work on a whole evening. But 3 out of 10 were women artists. And I think it could have been much worse. I expected it to be worse. But so the good thing, well, it's not 50-50, but the good thing is that AI can learn. We can teach it, and we can teach it by providing data. So this is very much the task, to put out the information there and to support all those initiatives, all those projects that actually put into energy into putting out what is not there already. And of course the museum has play a role in that, to do that. So I guess that's sort of my first reflection on AI and the museum. And so it's not only about providing the data, it's also about scrutinizing the way in which we organize knowledge.
Yeah, I think that's it. That is most important. So that cultural heritage institutions are not only the data providers, but they're actually playing an active role in developing AI tools and services for internal and external use. That means for the workflows we have in our institutions, for example, for creation of metadata, for extraction of data to, for example, suggest similar results in our collections, but also on the other side for providing chatbots for exhibitions or for digital collections for our final users to use. Yeah, I think that's an active role that we can all do. Amazing. And but for that, of course, we would probably need some strategies, Ole. Strategies that can heritage institutions adopt and ensure so that their collections and knowledge remain accessible to the public on fair and transparent terms.
Yeah, let me thank you very much, and thank you very much for this inspiring hour here. It's really some great points. I think I'll just say a few words about the National Encyclopedia, because for most countries it's unusual to have that. So we are public service media made to sort of like secure that everybody in Denmark has access to trustable trusted data, trusted knowledge. This is made as an opponent, you could say, to Wikipedia and to all the fake news and all the misinformation. So this is financed by the state, it's financed by all of us, it's public service media, it's free access, it has 250,000 articles written by scientists and people who knows about stuff. We have 1,000 scientists now writing for Lex. So this is an example in itself of how can a state, how can cultural heritage organizations, because this was very much made by publishers in Denmark, how can they actually do something in the new information environment that we're dealing with. And then, before I answer your question, then let's just jump back. What's actually happened in the last 25 years is not only that everybody got access to everything. The most important thing that happened in the last 25 years is that we allowed one tech company to be the gatekeeper for access to all information on the internet. It's no surprise for you that this company is Google. And for many years we thought about this company as a good company. They even had that as their slogan, "We do good." I mean, I would love to be at that meeting where they decided not to have that slogan anymore. But that's another story. But they, for many years, they were the search engine for access to information, and we all loved that. We were, you could say, we were pretty naive. I mean, we thought that was a great thing. But and the position we are in now is sort of like the natural final destination for what happened, because now it's not it's not a search engine anymore. Now it's an answer machine. And the problem is for us as cultural heritage institution is they're totally gatekeeper, and they made a disconnection in between the answers, which is not built on knowledge, it's built on language. So it's the language models who give us the answers, and there's a total disconnection between that and the sources, the data that we have as cultural heritage institutions. So that means, ladies and gentlemen, we actually lost the connection with the citizens in Europe and the world. I mean, and that's a real problem, and that's a problem that we need to deal with as cultural institutions, that we don't have access to the populations anymore on the internet. Of course, we have it in lovely museums like this, but on the internet, that's a different case. So, and I think we need to, as Harry said in the beginning, we need to really take it serious that we need to democratize access to cultural data, to all kinds of data, to all kinds of knowledge, to all kinds of trusted knowledge, because that's our democratic and cultural job to do that. And we can't, I mean, to be honest with you, we can't really trust the big tech companies. I mean, that's not a big surprise. We can't trust any of them. So we need to find our own ways to do that. And none of the cultural heritage institutions, or very few, is large enough or have budgets big enough or competences big enough to do that by themselves. So I think there's only one way to do it, and that is to go together with other cultural institutions. And that's what you said in the beginning, Camilla. We did that in Denmark. So what we did was we created like a huge partnership, which is pretty unique for all the big public service cultural heritage institutions in Denmark. The museum here, us, the National Archive, the National Library, the national statistic sources, and a few other, the National Museum as well, and a few others, to go together. And we have three simple principles or three simple ambitions for the strategy that we're doing, and that is that we share knowledge on what are we seeing, what is happening in the market for us on the internet. So that's one thing. The other thing is, the ambition is that we share technology. I mean, we might compete in other ways, but we do not compete on technology. So we share technology and use that as open source. So when we develop on Lex, we develop new technology, we share that, of course, with all the partners for free. And then the last ambition is, and that's a tough one, is that we share data, we share information, we share the things that we have in our archives, we share all that, and we try to stay open about that. Where should this be published? I mean, we know that it's going to be hard if we think that it should be published on OpenAI's platform, on Google's platforms, on Wikipedia, or on the new platform that Elon Musk created today, a new right-wing Wikipedia. So we need to create our own platforms to do this. And we need to make sure that the audience, the population in Denmark have access to this. And this is just the beginning. I mean, the partnerships thinking is just the beginning. And what we do also is that we take the democracy very serious. So we do it as a participatory project. That we invite people with huge ads in the newspapers, with huge ads on the internet, to actually ask a citizen in Denmark to help us develop this. We have now 5,000, a little more than 5,000 people who's actually participating in this. And we're starting with Denmark. And the next step is that we're going on with involving organizations like the ones in Denmark to participate from Norway, from Sweden, from Iceland, from other countries, and then we'll probably go broader. So one day we hope that we'll come and knock at your doors as well.
Amazing. So we would have, if you would like to have a strategic positioning, that would be a collaboration in openness.
Yes,
That'd be
absolutely
the case.
Yeah.
So with that, with openness, I would like to invite our next panelist, Brigitte, to say a few words on that. And particularly, as we have been talking, you have been mentioning CC and signals and open heritage statement. Please introduce us into that.
Thank you. And thank you for the invitation, and hello, everyone. So for those of you who don't know, Creative Commons, we're the organizations behind the copyright licenses and the public domain tools that enable cultural heritage institutions in particular to make their collections openly accessible for public enjoyment. And we were started about 25 years ago on the promise of open. Really, in the beginning, it was open, huge potential. Europeana is one of the trendsetters, really embracing this concept and using CC licenses and tools to implement them. SMK as well, one of the pioneers and still breaking ground in making 3D representations, for example, also openly accessible. And then came AI. And a lot of the things that have been mentioned already deeply affected Creative Commons and our community. Uncertainty, concerns about extractive practices, right? That's what we've been hearing, extraction, exploitative power structures, or even sometimes this concentration of power that is really a threat to sharing. Because it crushes people's expectation of open. It kind of busts the dream of all the potential of open and falls it off, closes it off with uncertainty and concerns, and sometimes even fear. And so the response, the natural response to fear, is to close up. So we've seen a lot of cultural heritage institutions deciding to actually lock up their collections in the context of AI training. And this is really posing a big threat to the commons. When we see that people are afraid to share and no longer want to contribute to the commons, this is an existential threat to the commons and to the value of open. And this, of course, this trend of enclosure of the commons can be understandable in this context, but I think it brings us to a very perplexing paradox, especially for cultural heritage institutions whose mission is to provide access to their collections to the public. They end up locking up their collections. And this paradox seems intractable until we go one layer deeper and we see that there are actually two values at play here. And I'll refer to the Europeana values, one where we want to make sure that the data is usable, and openness is a way to make the data usable, and the value of mutuality, where there's kind of an implicit agreement that if I give something away into the commons, I don't expect extraction and nothing back. There is an expectation that there will be something contributed back to the commons. But this, I think, surfaces two false binaries. One is the binary between closed and open, and we'll see how we can work around there. And the other false binary is the mission of Europeana to democratize access to knowledge opposed to innovations in AI, and the impression that the two cannot work together. So if we are able to explore the space in between, maybe we'll be able to resolve this paradox. So let's scratch a little bit beneath the surface of open. Open is not the end goal. It's not an end in and of itself. Open is a means to enable people to have a deeper connection, in this case with heritage. It's a pathway. It's a very practical means to enable people to access their cultural heritage, but it's not the destination. So it's a tool to achieve this deeper connection. And so this reveals another paradox, so I call this paradox redux, which is that open is a way to enable public access to heritage as a shared resource, as a global public good, but it's actually been diverted from its primary function in the age of AI, and it's used to extract value in ways that are not mutually beneficial. And this is the situation that we're in now. And I'm a copyright lawyer. Creative Commons was originally, I don't know if you knew this, but it was called Copyright Commons in the very beginning. So we build licenses on top of the copyright system. So our reflex, and this is something that Paul also mentioned, is to look to copyright for an answer. But it's quite a limited framework, as we soon encountered. First of all, it's unclear what the copyright rules are when it comes to using data for AI training. The rules are very new, and the technology is moving very fast, so copyright rules are not necessarily already all caught up. The other aspect is that the exceptions and limitations that we can rely on to access data for AI training exist on paper, they exist in the law, but they still need to be tested out in the courts. So there's a lot of fine print that needs to be further explicated. For example, under the Copyright Directive, you need to have lawful access to the data in order to benefit from an exception. Well, what does lawful access mean when we know that bots scrape the internet unchecked? So that's one consideration. And the other one is that the exceptions and limitations system in the EU is, at least for commercial purposes, is premised on the concept of an opt-out. So as a cultural heritage institution, if you own the copyright and data, you can actually decide to opt out of the exception regime, in which case anyone wanting to train on your data needs to ask for your permission. But still unclear what these opt-outs will look like, how they will be implemented, if they will really be enforceable. Again, these opt-outs offer us a binary, closed or open. I offer my data for AI training, or I block access and I expect a conversation with anyone who wants to train it. So this brings us to my final point, which is, again, let's look at the gray area between closed and open. Let's be more flexible. Let's be more granular. Let's be a little bit more nuanced. And let's really think and unpack what openness was originally designed for, and let's enable open to flourish in the age of AI. Open has maybe strayed away a little bit from its initial purpose, so it's an opportunity for us to correct course and to really set the direction that we want open to go into in the age of AI, because we want to make sure that the unintended consequences do not continue, and we can let go of what maybe no longer serves open. And there are two pathways to this, so this will answer your question. One is practical and tactical, and the other one is more aspirational and more high-level strategy. So the first one is about building the infrastructure and the tools to, I guess, redress a little bit the social contract that has been shaken by AI. And Creative Commons is developing, precisely to this end, CC signals. And these signals are tools which we're currently prototyping to enable data stewards to share their data in the commons for the specific purpose of AI training. And these signals are being developed under the overarching theme of reciprocity. I heard Harry mention that term many times. It's very similar to what Europeana understands with mutual. And the signals will have 3 elements, each to respond to 3 shortcomings of the current system. So the 3 shortcomings I tried to come up with an alliteration: trust, cost, and host. Trust in the sense that when we have content that is being trained on for AI, without any mention of the source, we cannot trust necessarily the result, and there's a loss of trust in the value chain. So in order to address this, one of the signals is to ensure that there is credit. So if you use that data for AI training, make sure that you credit the source. In terms of cost, I think it's no surprise that there's shortcomings in terms of resourcing the cultural heritage sector. So the signal would call for contribution to the entire ecosystem to make sure that it can survive and it can be sustainable in the future against this extractive practice. And the third one, host, is because we know that cultural heritage is well hosted in cultural heritage institutions that really care for its preservation and its transmission to new generations. And it's meant to be accessible to the public. What we're seeing is a threat of enclosure, and that culture, as Paul also pointed, becoming the property, really, of AI companies. So we're seeing a phenomenon of potential privatization of the commons and emergence of these walled gardens instead of the commons. So the signals are really a way to shift power back to the data stewards and cultural heritage institutions to really enable them to fulfill their mission. And then the second path, and I'll end with this, is this aspirational policy and advocacy pathway, which is to go back and really recognize the amazing, intrinsically good potential of open. Let's not lose track of that in this whole AI madness. And let's harness this dilemma that we're all grappling with and really go back to our fundamentals, is how we as a sector can ensure equitable access to heritage, and how important this is to build the open and knowledgeable and creative societies that we want to see. And to help us achieve that, I'd like to mention the Open Heritage Statement, which is a declaration of principles and values, but also very concrete policy actions that we can take together to make sure that open is, again, a vector in order to ensure equitable access to heritage in the digital environment, so that we can infuse these values and take into account ethical concerns, making sure that when data is accessed for AI training, it is done in the spirit that we intended in the first place. So my take-home message is we need to infuse our values and make sure that they are taken into account in the development of AI. We need to advocate for ourselves. So if you consider yourself concerned by this, sign the Open Heritage Statement. And yeah, let's build the infrastructure of the future and make sure that we send out a positive signal.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brigitte. I would invite also other speakers, maybe if maybe for a comment on what were mutual for a mutual discussion. But what I see, and I would maybe also point to, is that I see you have been mentioning pathways, but I think these are the pathways of how cultural heritage institutions can provide access and reuse for our final users. And I'll come back to users. Why? Because I think the users are the ones that we are, well, for them, we are here. If we don't have the users, we don't need to exist. I mean, what is then our existence? What is worth of our institutions? So I would ask you all about this, and I would ask you if we would maybe have to think about who our users are. Do we still have the same audience? Or maybe we could think about the user in different perspective. We have been hearing about big companies harvesting of our data. Could they be maybe our users? Could we have our position, I'll say, and this is provocative, cooperate with Google and be the first among results where our cultural heritage is I'll say, the source of the information that somebody who searches the internet gets I'll say, the abstract, and that our data is used for that. What do you think? Yeah, Ole.
Well, I think that's the way we went. That's the way we went with Google. We thought they were our users. We thought that they could sort of like handle the connection with our users, and we totally lost control of our own content. We lost control of the access to the users. So I don't think that's the way to go. I mean, we need to re-establish contact with our users in the future. And luckily enough, I mean, history. One of the speakers before mentioned the public service and the establishing of public service media in Europe, and that's a very good example. And there's actually some values there that we can tag into. One is must carry. That the broadcasters or the antenna companies, they must carry public service content. And what if that was a claim, or that was a boundary that was set for the tech giants in Europe, that they must carry cultural heritage institutions on the internet. So when you go on Google's search page, or when you go on another Bing or something else, then and you are in Denmark, then of course you will be met by SMK and by others as a public service must carry thing. That would be one thing to do. There's other things to tag into in public service. There's also the whole responsibility of the editor, because we tend to not look at these tech platforms as media, or they claim themselves sometimes that they're not media, and other times they are. But we could tag into the public service idea of that there's actually need to be responsible editors. So to answer your question, no. I mean, we need to re-establish the context with the users, and I think the development of the new technology is a good chance for us to do that, because there's a lot of possibilities in this, and we can do this by sort of like democratization of the new offers that we're going to build together, and do it through participation of the citizens in the countries.
So with embracing new technologies, cultural heritage sector could play a trustworthy and reliable parallel to what we have now as a more global and say generic systems that we have.
Yeah. We need to find alikes like ourselves. I mean, institutions, organizations, people who share values with us as cultural heritage institutions. I mean, we tend to forget also that, I mean, we think that, or we thought at least that Google and the other companies, that they had it as a purpose to give access to trustable information, but that's not true. I mean, their purpose was to give to get knowledge about the users and sell it to the advertisers. So, and that's a whole other story. I mean, their business model and OpenAI's business model and the other company's business model is not to give access to trustable information. That's our business model, and we are alone on that. And no other, none of the tech companies have that business model. So we need to find our position on the internet and make what somebody called a public AI ecosystem. it sounds like a big task, doesn't it? But you build a museum, so we can build that as well.
Well, I didn't build it. We have history behind us. Yeah.
Camilla, would you?
Yeah, but I'm thinking about the users, and in the museum we also have very local users, and I'm just returning to our experiences with the chatbot, but it could also be our online collection. And when thinking about the users and sort of democratic access to knowledge, it also points towards some other perspectives, because it's not only about getting access to knowledge, it's also about getting access in a different way. And I think that's also really interesting when we sort of focus into how can we work with AI in the museum as a tool of mediation, because the thing is that you can go to our online collection and you can say, I want something blue, I want unicorns, I want whatever. You don't need to know a name of any artist in the world. You don't need to know the category of any technical medium or whatever. You can just search for whatever term that you decide. And in the same way, when we had the chatbot in the exhibition with Anne-Marie Carl Nielsen, you could go in dialogue with the historical material, but you went into dialogue from your position in the presence. And the answers that you got back were also sort of mediated by presence. So it was all the archival material, but spoken out in a language that is the language of our presence. So I think the interface to the archive becomes immensely interesting, because this question about democracy, and access, first of all, it takes the starting point in the present now. So that is, I think, that's sort of a game change or shift of perspective, that the archive becomes present because it is put into dialogue from this very moment, but also that you can certainly access the archive through other categories, through other ways of knowing. And I think that's also really interesting when thinking about the relation between users, democracy, and archives mediated through AI.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think if we only think of machines as our users, it will, I think, make us lose sight of the point. I can think of 3 categories of users that are absolutely critical. The first one being scientists. So we often think of cultural heritage as art and creativity, but there's also very valuable scientific information that is embodied in art artifacts, and scientists can access this in a digital environment to make new discoveries and help us address the big challenges of our time, like climate change, for example. So the Natural History Museum in the UK digitized butterflies, and scientists were able to map out how the size of butterflies evolve with climate change. So hotter years give bigger insects. So yeah, let's make sure we don't get too hot. Also, maps of shipwrecks in the sea can give us information about how the currents move. So a lot of valuable information for scientists. Educators, to give an example from Denmark, I know Wikipedia did this project called Wikipedia in the classroom, where children could interact with Wikipedia and cultural heritage that is shown on this platform to have more participatory experiences. And then the third one is creators and artists and today who can really interrogate the cultural heritage collections to make it more relevant in contemporary culture. And again, here SMK is leading the way, where sculptures are being used in films to really enable people to express their creativity. But all of us, I think, are users of cultural heritage sector. We all need to be able to shape the discourse of how cultural heritage is part of our community. This is our fundamental right. So I think we are allowed to also put ourselves in the equation.
Amazing. I really find interesting the positioning of cultural heritage alongside the science, because this part is missing many times. And as we have policies at the European level that address open science, we also need to align with that, with cultural heritage. So this is excellent. And this is, I'll say, we can close up our panel with that, because I think it's a very nice thought. And I think we have discussed, well, shortly the most important, I'll say, levels of how to address the strategical positioning of AI in cultural heritage sector. So I would say thank you to all the panelists, and we would then move forward to the policymakers, and also welcome with us Rihanna Schwininger-Ladek from the European Commission, and hopefully see how the role of data space and specifically Europeana data space for cultural heritage can evolve and have the role and shape the future of EU in AI policy.
Thank you so much for inviting me to react to what has been said. So first of all, I would start by thanking Harry for allowing me to intervene online, because I had a little accident and unfortunately I couldn't be with you. And I would really like to congratulate all of you for a super webinar. Really, I found the speeches and the talks extremely interesting, the panel really fascinating, and I'm really sorry not to be there. So Harry asked me to react as a policymaker to what has been said, to the alignment paper. So I've been really studiously, reading the paper, listening to you, and really, taking some notes in relation to also what's going on at the EU level. So first of all, I find this really it's an exercise which is quite unique to this community, and which reflects very well how developments are co-created and are co-shaped in the digital cultural heritage community. And itself, this exercise has a lot of merit in terms of insights, of knowledge which is created, and also of engagement. 400 professionals who came for the alignment paper. Secondly, the alignment paper brightly recognizes that it's a community which has not been a bystander, but rather an agent of its own digital transformation. And third, the topic of AI is not new. The policy, the European policy, which is a recommendation on a common European data space, and which came out in 2021, already mentions AI in its early preambles of the document. And we have also been supporting funding calls for the use of AI in the data space. But the difference in this past 3 years is really the sense of urgency due to the tremendous technological progress, be it in general purpose AI or generative AI. And it's a sense of urgency that I see which is multidimensional. And which came out, in the different talks and in the panel. One is a sense of urgency to have access to very, very high volumes of data, of high quality, trusted, domain-specific data sets for training LLMs. And this is really one of the defining factors of global competitiveness for the EU in general. Secondly, it's a sense of urgency for staying relevant. It is about, as was written in the paper, about claiming a meaningful role in the development of AI. This was very well introduced by Harry. And what I also like what Paul says, we don't want to be a little wheel on the side. It is how do we position ourselves really as at the center of how this is really transforming our relation to knowledge, and about grasping how this is being transformed. And what we see is that on the one hand, we are really accelerating what we have been doing, which is leveraging AI for cultural heritage application and use cases, such as for digitization, documentation process, automatic enrichment, improved semantic searches, and many more. And Camila also mentioned some of those use cases and also how archives can help to mediate through AI, and this is really fascinating. But on the other hand, and which is really what we're looking at, what is at the heart of this discussion is how do we position cultural heritage data as valuable for training European AI systems, and which would also allow us to ensure that our principles of openness, usability, reliability, trust, authority, reciprocity are reflected in the further development of AI, but also that Europe's cultural richness and linguistic diversity is present in AI models. So it's really a double challenge that we have ahead of us. And reading the alignment paper, from the 7 key themes and insights, some will lead to further reflections and actions that the community will further pursue that have been mentioned during the call, the webinar, and some others are aligned with our current and planned actions at Commission level. And I would like to mention 3 of them, which I think are quite, relevant for this conversation here. First is the AI Continent Action Plan, which is a horizontal policy document which was presented early 2025, and it aims at leveraging the potential of AI to enhance Europe's competitiveness and innovation while safeguarding its democratic values and protecting its cultural and linguistic diversity. So this is really very much at the heart of the action plan. And here I would really like to recall what President von der Leyen said at the AI Action Summit in Paris in February 2025, just before the action plan came, is we want AI to be a force for good and for growth. She tightly links economic growth, competitiveness with the wider good, because this is our European way. One doesn't go without the other. And one of the key actions of the AI Continent Action Plan are the AI factories that will provide computing power and customized support services for free in order to strengthen EU strategic technical sovereignty. And these are public AI infrastructures that Paul was mentioning in his talk, and their deployment is grounded on public values. So culture is going to be one of the strategic sectors of these AI factories. And we have in Greece the Greek AI factory, which has culture as one of its main focus areas. But we will also have other AI factories and AI antennas, such as in Germany, that will have culture among their focus areas. So AI factories can help the development of sophisticated AI models for a variety of purpose, to digitize, to preserve, to reconstruct historical artifacts and languages on an unprecedented scale. Or they can also help to really analyze, accelerate the analysis of vast historical archives, really to help us uncover new societal and historical insights. So I would really encourage all of you here also to really get in touch with these AI factories, and Harry has already started this work, which really will be very interesting and promising. I would also like to mention the data labs, which will be an integral components of this AI factory. And the data labs will enable the provision, the pooling, and the secure sharing of high quality data, high quality and trusted data for AI innovators, such as for open public AI ready data. So in this sense, the data space has really an important role to play towards creating bridges with the data labs. So this is the developments that are happening within the AI Continent Action Plan, which are really very promising for the community. Secondly, we're going to have very soon on November 19th, the Data Union by the Commission, which is going to be presented by the Commission. And the Data Union strategy will aim at shifting the focus from setting rules for data to using data. And the aim is really to have more value through large trusted pools of high quality data, how can we really facilitate the training of AI, large language models, and how do we ensure that the data needed for AI, for innovation, for competitiveness is really data of high quality, which is an open data, which is which comes from trusted sources. All that has been mentioned in the various interventions before. And third, we will soon publish the new data space strategy for the period 2025-2030 for the data space for cultural heritage. And of course, obviously, how could it not be? AI is one of the 3 cross-cutting themes in this strategy. And we know that AI comes across all the 3 pillars that are going to be part of the strategy. I won't mention them here because it's not the purpose, and I think Harry will mention it later. But we mentioned during the different interventions how data providers, how cultural heritage institutions really need to be in control of the conditions under which their data and their digital data can be reused, particularly in light of all the copyright challenges, and how we can really have these nuances that Brigitte was mentioning about really clarifying all these gray areas between closed and open. And this has been identified as one of the challenges brought by AI in the strategy which is going to come. And the data space will expand the mechanism to enable different types of exchange conditions so that the cultural heritage institutions have more control of how they share the data while maintaining data sovereignty. So this is, some of the reactions I wanted to share with you and link them with what's happening at EU level and how really this conversation is really so timely and in a way so urgent. So thank you for giving me the opportunity, and back to you, Ines. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rihanna, for strategical positioning of AI in the European space, which is also the basis for the positioning of AI on the national levels. To wrap up shortly at the end, we have just a few minutes, and for that reason, I would like to invite Harry back on stage as a head of the Cultural Heritage Data Space Europeana. And on the other side, I would like to invite the head of the whole event, the whole, development of everything that we did today is Jill Cousins, and she also was head of Europeana many years ago. And I'll try to represent the global AI community in cultural heritage as AI for LAM secretary. And please, Jill, you had a few lines to address, but I think we should keep it short. I think it's a long day that we had, so please.
I had 10 questions. I've now got 2.
Excellent.
We have been looking at how we could and should position ourselves as a sector in relation to AI, and maybe how we make sure we are part of this public AI going forward. So the first question, I think a relatively easy one for the pair of you. It's something that I think was very much in the Alignment Assembly documentation, but we didn't talk about quite so much over the last 2 days, and that was around training and the lack of knowledge, and what are we going to do about it? So what are we going to do about it in AI for LAM? What are we going to do about it in regards to data space?
So, okay, training of the models on
training around AI and actually lack of knowledge around AI,
of our employees.
Yeah, or of the sector generally, so people within the sector. Yeah.
Okay, I think with the educational programs that will keep our people, our employees up to date of what's happening, so that they can with more confidence embrace new tools. I think that's the key to success. And I'll pass it on to Harry.
Yeah, and I think training is a vast field. I think there's already a lot out there, even from Google. Actually, do pretty good trainings on, how do you write good prompts and those kinds of things. That's not really the issue. I think I'd like to proceed working on the the dilemmas we've started unpacking. How can you make your data available in a proper way? How can you deal with bias? How can you deal with climate? In a very collaborative way. I think that's how we learn, right? We learn by working and doing things together. So I think that's what I think I'd like to focus on in terms of training as far as the data space is concerned. Developing frameworks together, training in that sense. Yeah.
But also maybe with a collaborative power.
Sure.
If we are embarking on the same route together, so Europeana and AI for LAM, and we already have, I'll say, academia with Europeana communities, and we have webinars, and we have educational programs, we should develop them in the same direction so that we support each other and our communities, not just European, in the European space, but also global-wise.
And then a very short question, really. We have those values. Do you really think we are going to be able to maintain them as AI progresses and we have this big tech going forwards? Mutual, usable, reliable.
It's a typical you to go off
Yeah.
script here, right?
Shorter though.
Yeah, no, I would say, if I would start, I think I'm reinforced in the idea that we should keep to those values. I think usable is not so much the issue for me, but how can we keep reliability, trustworthiness, really at the center of things? I think with metadata we've dabbled into that. I think if you look at the Europeana database, you could argue we've done a lot of good work in the right direction. Is it all as trustworthy, for example, copyright-wise, as we would want to? Maybe not, but we've always been on that trajectory. And I think the key will be how can we be reliable in an AI sense, because it poses completely new challenges to that same word, reliability. How does data show up in an LLM chatbot in a way that we consider reliable? That's new, but I think it doesn't change at all the fundamentals of the values, the belief system.
Just the mutual side of that. So
Yeah.
that's the bit for me that is the hardest in this challenge.
Yeah.
But I think these are the values that are the values of the cultural heritage sector.
Yeah.
So the values will not change if we use new technology. It would be the same if we would say, okay, the values would change because we went from the card catalog to the online databases. But it didn't. Also, our values didn't change when we started using Microsoft Word and Excel instead of typing on the typewriter. So it's a technology that we can use for our workflows. Of course, it's working differently, but we can turn that into our benefit. And there are already nice use cases that already implemented that in that way. So I would not fear to lose our values.
And you think we can maintain mutuality?
Well, I could even challenge it. I think maybe mutuality has been the weakest thing in the past 15 years. It doesn't change, I agree with you. But it is true that we make a lot of data available at great costs because we believe in truth and so forth. And the use cases we use are not always, showing a lot of mutuality and reciprocity. And I think that's something to keep working on. I really like what Brigitte suggested with CC signals. It depends on what do you expect in return, right? It's not maybe necessarily money, although it's possible. That's the model Paul suggested. But at least the least thing you would expect is an acknowledgement of where the data came from, and so forth. So building on that, I think, will help us in this indeed difficult part of the thing. No.
To conclude, I would go back to the Danish presidency, and I would also say that the regional impact that cultural heritage institutions have, and which was already mentioned also by Ole and Camilla, and that the role of cultural heritage institutions in, say, smaller environments, it can be smaller like a national or more local, is also something that is the value of the sector. So, and for this, and at that part, I don't think it will change as dramatically.
I was very inspired by the Danish example, and I thought that was really, really good. I thought the CC signals was also fantastic. And please, 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 can we have public AI, and can we make it happen? So thank you both, and thank you all for this last couple of days, and all the work you're going to do.
Thank you.
Said the retired director.
With this, we can conclude today.
Yeah.
It was an amazing day, and also yesterday. And thank you very much, all the audience here in the room and one online, for staying with us. And please keep track on what we're doing, and please join our initiatives and our actions to a fantastic future. Thank you.